You mentioned that we can't perceive something that's not already within us, like the example you gave with the gurus during our meditation today. But this is also applicable with things such as greed, anger, ignorance, etc. Do these things come into our awareness because of the quality of our consciousness? Or is there a point where we won't be aware of anger anymore? Anger will always be there. I mean, there's always a reason to be angry about something. It's just a natural state of energy exchange within the world. Animals get angry, or at least they get aggressive. Sometimes animals get despondent. Sometimes they get fearful or anxious. But the difference between us and animals is that they usually don't dwell on it, meaning it's a passing experience, it's a passing emotion. They have it, they let it go. They move on with whatever's coming next. The difference with us, with our ability to cognize and remember and conceptualize things like time, is that the problem we have is that when we get angry, well, rather than just being appropriate with the anger and maybe expressing it, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with expressing anger, we hold on to it and we make it something that we define ourselves by. So anything that we can experience, yes, anything that we can experience, from the most horrific, horrendous act of criminal minds to the most beautiful blessings a saint can give, all those are possibilities within consciousness. And all those are within the infinite. And what we're doing with yoga is recognizing that first off. And secondly, we're then deciding, do we really want to entertain that? Because there's a possibility for any kind of experience. And this is why, I've said this during our retreat back in New York, and I've said it other times too. When I was younger, I was really interested in like how people think and what they do, because it perplexed me. I would observe the behaviors of people and see what they were doing and wonder, why would they keep doing that? That doesn't make any sense. I remember one time I was very young, and my mom was talking about one of her friends who kept putting herself in a really bad situation with a relationship. And I was young. I might not have even been a teenager yet. And what came out of my mouth was, well, she must like it. My mom got mad. She's like, what do you mean she must like it? I was like, well, she keeps putting herself back in that situation. She must like it for some reason. So I had an interest in why people did what they did. But as the years went by, I observed that people do what they do, and we do what we do because we want to resonate or experience something particular. And most of us haven't really thought that through. And so life seems chaotic. Life seems like things just happen randomly. That's because we haven't really kind of chosen a direction. And even when you choose a direction, of course, sometimes you have hiccups that occur in all the great adventures. Nothing goes as planned. But you tend to kind of hold a particular kind of frequency and experience once you decide that is important to you. So anyway, this is why you have to be conscious of what you have to be conscious of what you want in your consciousness. And you have to be conscious of what is in your consciousness, because there might be things that are there because you just haven't chosen a different experience, or for whatever reason, or because you keep choosing that experience. So the first step is always admitting that any possibility exists in consciousness. Anything that could possibly happen definitely exists somewhere in some way in consciousness. But what we're doing with the practice of yoga is we're choosing, in a sense, to either rise above certain things or to gain greater knowledge of certain things. In the Holy Science, Sri Yukteswar talks about, in a way, these states of consciousness, or these worlds, these spiritual worlds. And he describes how when you're so caught up in the human experience with all of its emotions and sentimentality, you can't usually perceive higher realms, because when you believe that all that exists is matter, and these emotions, well, you have a really hard time. You can't even conceive of something beyond that. It seems ridiculous or wrong. But as a person grows spiritually and they rise through to other realms, if you want to think of it that way, or clearer states of consciousness, well, then like, wow, this is a whole other way of being. But now they can, if we're using the metaphor of up and down, they can look down and see the morass of human difficulty, because the higher up you go, you can see below, but the lower you are, you can't quite see up. That's why we have these practices and we have these gurus who are on, and again, the metaphor, this is just a metaphor. This is not to say someone is worse off than another person, whom have reached the mountaintop, and they can look down from that mountaintop view and they can see where everyone is, and they can see the pitfalls, and they can say, oh, well, maybe you want to go a little to the right here. And if the people way down there can hear the guru, then they'll listen and they'll follow it, and they'll eventually make it to the top, and they'll also have that wonderful view. But most of us aren't listening. And so we're down here, and we know there's a top up there, but we don't know that if we take a right turn here, we're about to experience a pitfall or some setback. We don't know that if we went left instead, that the way would be clear. So we always need to remember simply that faith in a guru, in a teacher, in a teaching is very important. Of course, finding someone who actually has experienced these higher states of consciousness is not easy, because there are plenty of people who have dreams or fantasies and make things up and believe that they've experienced things they haven't, and they really believe it. But if you get lucky, or if you have the intention to find someone who can help you in that way, sometimes they'll say things and you just have to listen and trust. And that has always been my experience. I remember very early on with Mr. Davis, there were a few things that I really doubted what he said. When he talked, I just thought, yeah, okay, I get that. I've thought that my whole life. But there were a few things that I went, are you sure? I mean, are you not just old and, set in your ways and don't quite understand what life is like now? I thought things like that until a few years later, as I had more experiences, I realized, oh no, he pretty much knew what he was talking about. So there is a level of, number one, developing your own discernment to recognize who is helpful and who is not. There's also the issue of being able to listen and continue on your way. And then you're able to recognize these things, and also how there really is no problem with anger. There's no problem with sadness. There's no problem with fear. The problem is the holding on to it, believing that it is you. And it's not that you don't become aware of anger anymore. It's more so that you see it, and now you can choose to express it or not. And this has been my experience. In the last many years, I can't even think how far back, I've gotten angry, sure. But when I was younger, like as a teenager, when I got angry, I'd be so overcome with anger that things just happened. I did things that later I thought to myself, well, that was interesting. I was sort of out of control. But once you get more clarity, then when anger arises, you can decide, well, is it appropriate to express this now? And sometimes it is. If someone's doing something to you and you need to be very clear, no, this is not acceptable, well, then getting angry and using that expression of aggression to make it very clear where you stand with things, there's no problem with that. Same thing with sadness and anxiety. It's okay to feel those things. It's when you let them control you or define you that the problem arises. Okay.